The screen opens not on my face, but on a memory. A photograph, slightly faded at the edges, glowing with that particular warmth of a living room lamp. Everyone is smiling. A real, crinkle-eyed smile from my mother, my father's arm proudly around my shoulders. It's a portrait of belonging. The camera begins a slow, deliberate zoom on their faces, as if searching for a clue, a hint of what was to come. As their smiles grow larger on the screen, they begin to dissolve, not into darkness, but into another scene. The warmth bleeds away, replaced by the cool, clear light of a dining room. The photograph has become reality, but a reality gone terribly still. We are at the table. The beautiful, elaborate spread of food, the stewed herbs, the saffron rice, the crusty bread, looks more like a museum exhibit than a meal. Plates are half full, glasses of tea grow cold, untouched. This is the silence. It's not peaceful. It's a physical presence, thick and heavy, like a humidity you can't escape. You can hear the scrape of a fork, the distant hum of a refrigerator, the unbearable weight of words not spoken. My father's gaze is fixed on a point somewhere beyond the window, studying the outside world as if it holds an answer. My mother's hands, usually fluttering with hospitality, are folded neatly in her lap, prisoners of her own restraint, and between them, the person I love, trying to navigate this invisible emotional minefield with a quiet smile that grows more fragile by the second. I remember thinking in that moment that I would give anything for a shout, for a slammed door, for the clear, sharp lines of an argument, anything but this profound, echoing quiet. It was a void, and into that void, my mind rushed to pour every possible meaning, every fear, every disappointment. This was the moment it happened. The moment the script of my life, the one I thought we were all co-writing, tore cleanly down the middle. The before, full of noise and expectation and known pathways, and the after, which was this, a quiet so deafening it changed the very frequency of my heart. And as the camera holds on this frozen tableau, three people orbiting a shared pain no one will name, the title appears, simple and stark against the silence that changed everything. In the echo of that terrible dinner, in the days that followed where phone calls were brief and conversations hovered on the weather, I became an archaeologist of quiet. I sifted through every non-word, every averted gaze, every clipped on the phone. I had to decode it, because in my family, in so many families woven tight with tradition and unspoken rules, silence is not an absence of language. It is a dialect all its own. First and most primal is disapproval without confrontation. A direct argument would be an acknowledgement, a negotiation between equals. But this silence is a hierarchy maintained. It says, what you have done is so fundamentally misaligned with our world that it exists beneath discussion. It is the emotional equivalent of a raised drawbridge. I think of Max Amini's bit about this very thing. You bring home a perfectly nice person, he says, pacing the stage, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, and your dad doesn't even look at them. He looks at you, with this face like he just found a single disappointing hair in his tadig, and he says nothing. Because the crime is not that you brought someone. The crime is that you made him see it. You forced his hand out of his pocket of peaceful denial. The laughter in the audience is sharp, filled with recognition. It's the laughter of those who know that a shouted no is a boundary you can push against, but a silent steady. We do not acknowledge this is a wall you can only beat your head upon. Beneath that stone layer of disapproval, however, runs a deep, cold river of fear of losing you. This is the part that, in my most angry moments, I refuse to see. Their silence wasn't just a weapon. It was a fortress. By not speaking of my new love, by not giving it the oxygen of acknowledgement, they could perhaps starve it. They could preserve the you they knew, the child whose future was a clear, predictable path they had lovingly mapped. To speak of my choice was to admit the map was obsolete, that I was now an explorer charting my own territory, and explorers might not come home. The silence was a desperate, clumsy attempt to keep me in the harbor. Max jokes about the Persian parental telepathy that kicks in. They don't call you for a week. That's the signal you're supposed to feel the void, panic, and come running back saying, Baba, Mama, I was hypnotized. It's over. And when you don't, the silence gets heavier. Now it's not just we disapprove, it's we are waiting and we are worried. He mimes his mother staring at him, her eyes welling with a tragic prophecy. She's not even crying about now, he explains. She's crying about the grandchild she's decided you will never have, about the lonely future you're blindly walking into. She's mourning a tragedy that hasn't happened yet, all in perfect, heartbreaking silence. This fear is inextricably linked to their own unmet dreams. You are not just their child. You are the clean slate, the second chance, the living vessel for every sacrifice they ever made. Your happiness is paramount, but it must, on some level, validate their journey. Your success must look like the success they were denied. Your good marriage, your respectable life is the final dividend on their investment of struggle. When you choose a path that seems foreign to them, their silence is the sound of that dream shattering. It's not just about you marrying someone they wouldn't have chosen, it's the visceral, unspoken question, was it all for this? Did I leave my home, learn this new language, work until my bones ached, for a child who now turns away from everything I represent? The silence holds that profound disappointment, not in you necessarily, but in the universe for not following the promised script. And finally, giving structure to all of it is the cage of cultural shame. What will people say? This is the ghost that sits at every table, the invisible third party in every conversation. It is the collective weight of 1,000 aunties and uncles, real and imagined. The silence from my parents was, in large part, a panic about this external noise. They weren't just processing their own feelings, they were rehearsing for a chorus of judgment they were sure was coming. How would they explain this? What defenses could they possibly mount? In the face of that looming societal scrutiny, silence feels like the only safe harbor. If they don't speak of it, perhaps people won't see it. If they don't acknowledge it, they cannot be held accountable for it. Max has a whole routine about this, of course. You tell your mom one little thing, he says, and instantly her face goes pale. She's not thinking about you. She's writing the newsletter in her head. To the esteemed members of the community, it is with a heavy heart we inform you that our son has chosen a path of moderate individuality. She's already hearing the phone ring. She's already tasting the thinly veiled concern at the next party, so she shuts it down. We won't talk about this, because if the words don't leave this house, maybe the shame won't either. For weeks, I stewed in this decoded brew. I was angry at the disapproval, heartbroken by the fear, guilty about the dreams, and resentful of the invisible people whose opinions seemed to matter more than my heart. I thought their silence was a void meant to erase my choice, but I was wrong. Their silence wasn't empty. It was full, crammed to the bursting point with everything they were afraid to say. We are scared. We don't understand this world you're in. We feel obsolete. We are terrified of the gossip that will paint us as failures. We love you so much it feels like a constant, quiet panic. They packed all of that, the fear, the love, the pride, the shame, into a perfect, airtight vacuum of quiet and handed it to me. It was the most overwhelming gift I had ever received. I just didn't know yet that the task wasn't to live under its weight, but to find a way to carefully, bravely open it. The silence did not end when we closed the front door that night. It followed us out. It got into the car, a third passenger in the back seat, cold and immense. It came home with us, filling the spaces between our words in the apartment that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. The aftermath was not a clean break. It was a slow immersion into a new, soundless reality where every thought became deafening. The first casualty was my own mind. In the vacuum their words had left, a storm of doubt rushed in. Was I wrong? Became a constant pulsing rhythm in my head. Had I, in my selfish pursuit of passion, committed a fundamental act of betrayal? Was this love, which had felt so intuitive and right in its own bubble, actually a terrible mistake when viewed through the lens of my family's legacy? I began conducting brutal postmortems on my own life. Had I misinterpreted every lesson, every value they'd ever taught me? The quiet from them felt like a judgment so absolute it forced me to re-adjudicate my own heart with myself as the hostile witness. I'd lie awake, replaying my mother's last normal conversation with me about something as trivial as a recipe, searching for a hidden code, a warning I had missed. Max Amini captures this mental spiral perfectly. You become a detective in the worst mystery novel ever, he jokes. his eyes wide with mock paranoia. "You're analyzing your mom's voicemail about watering the plants. She said the ficus looks dry. The ficus, is that a metaphor? Is the ficus my love life? Is she saying my love life is arid and unsustainable?" You zoom in on a family photo from 3 years ago, looking for a sign in your dad's posture. It's insane. You're trying to decode happiness from a pixelated JPEG of a barbecue. This internal earthquake inevitably shook the foundations of my relationship. There were moments of sheer, clinging solidarity, us against the world. We'd huddle on the couch, speaking in low tones, dissecting the latest non-interaction. "Your dad actually took the container of food I brought back," my partner would say, and we'd spend an hour analyzing that gesture. Was it acceptance? A polite dismissal? It felt like we were co-conspirators, whispering in the dark, and that bond had a fierce, desperate heat to it. But in other moments, the pressure found its cracks. Their silence became a ghost in our arguments. A small disagreement about something trivial would suddenly swell, charged with the unspoken question, is this the flaw they saw? Is this the reason? I'd catch myself watching my partner through what I imagined were my parents' eyes, a cruel, disorienting trick of the heart. Were they too quiet? Was their laugh too loud? The shadow of that disapproval, even unvoiced, could make the sunniest day between us feel fragile. And this led to the quiet, secret rebellion. Their silence felt like a demand for erasure. So my love became an act of defiance. Holding hands in a public place felt charged. Posting a simple, happy picture online felt like a manifesto. See? I wanted to scream into the quiet. We exist, we are happy, despite you. But rebellion fueled by anger is exhausting. It ties your joy to their disapproval, making you forever glance over your shoulder. It's a reactive love, not a proactive one, and it started to drain the very color from the connection it was meant to protect. The deepest, most terrifying question, however, was the one about identity. Am I still their child? The love of a parent feels like the one constant, the gravitational force that holds your universe in place. Their silence felt like that force had vanished. I was floating, untethered. I was no longer the good son following a visible path. So who was I? A rebel? A traitor? A stranger? I would catch my reflection and wonder if the person they saw was someone they even recognized anymore. The rituals of family, the weekly calls, the Sunday visits became minefields of painful performance. I was playing the role of their child, but the script had been burned, and every interaction was an improvisation laced with grief. Max touches on this existential dread with his signature blend of humor and pain. "You're waiting for the other shoe to drop," he says, miming, looking up at the ceiling anxiously. But the thing is, with Persian parents, the first shoe isn't a shout, it's the silence. So you're just standing there, frozen, waiting for a second silence? How does that even work? You're in a silent shoe store and you're going crazy. The laughter is uneasy because we know he's right. The anxiety isn't about a new explosion, it's about living in the permanent aftermath of the first one. Yet slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift in that bunker. The constant analysis start to wear itself out. The reactive rebellion began to feel hollow, and in the exhausted quiet that followed my own internal storm, I began to hear something else. I heard my partner's steady patience. I heard their quiet "I'm here," offered not as a passionate declaration, but as a fact, as solid and unassuming as a floorboard. I saw them showing up day after day, not for a dramatic fight against my parents, but for the mundane, beautiful work of building a life, making coffee, remembering to buy more toothpaste, making me laugh when I was lost in my own head. This was the revelation. In that quiet, I learned love isn't just passion. Passion is the spark, the lightning bolt. It's easy to love in the sunlight when everyone is cheering. But their silence had thrown us into a long, cold night. And in that night, I saw love for what it truly is. It's loyalty. A dogged, unglamorous daily choice. It's loyalty to yourself, to the small, quiet voice in your heart that they tried to shout down with their quiet. It's choosing, moment by moment, to trust your own map over the one that was taken from you. It's looking in the mirror and deciding that you are still you, even if that you is now someone your parents don't fully understand. And more profoundly, it's loyalty to the person beside you. It's the choice to turn toward them when the world or your family turns away. It's building a shared language of glances and touches says, that means I see you bearing this too. It's the solidarity that evolves from conspiracy into foundation. Their silence had forced us to ask a brutal question: is this just about us, or is it for us? And in the answering, we found a strength that wasn't based on rebellion, but on a simple, steadfast commitment. We were no longer just two people in love. We were a unit, forged not in the fire of their approval, but in the cold, strengthening steel of their silence. The silence over time ceased to be just a weapon they wielded or a weight I carried. It became a space, a cold, empty room I was forced to inhabit. And you cannot live in a vacuum forever. Either you are suffocated by it, or you are forced to fill it with the sound of your own making. Their refusal to speak became the greatest and most brutal invitation of my life, an invitation to find my own voice. The first step in that echoing quiet was the hardest. I had to listen to my own heart. For so long, the soundtrack of my life had been a chorus of their hopes, their fears, their definitions of success and propriety. My own desires were a faint melody, often drowned out, but now the chorus had fallen silent. The external noise was gone. All that was left was the internal whisper I had spent a lifetime learning to ignore. At first, it was terrifying. That whisper wasn't a confident shout. It was shaky, full of doubt, asking simple, scary questions. What do you want this life to feel like? What does honor mean to you? Who are you when no one is applauding or disapproving? I had to sit with those questions. I had to disentangle my own dreams from the dreams that had been handed to me like a family heirloom. It was messy work, like trying to separate individual threads in a tightly woven carpet. Max Amini, in one of his more vulnerable bits, leans against the stool on stage, the comedian's grin softening. You know, he says, the room growing still, we spend so much energy trying to tune into their frequency, the sigh, the glance, that if you really loved us, that our own signal gets weak, static. Sometimes they go quiet not to punish you, but because your channel's finally clear, and you're just scared to hear what's on it. In that clear, painful channel, I found no grand manifesto, just a simple, persistent truth. I love this person, not as an act of rebellion, not as a fantasy, but as a fact of my being, as fundamental as my own breath. From that listening came the necessity to define love on my own terms. Their silence was, in essence, a rejection of my definition. So I had to ask, what was my definition? Was it the dramatic soulmate narrative I'd absorbed from movies? Was it the transactional stability-focused model I sensed they wanted for me? In the quiet, with only my partner and our day-to-day life as a reference, a new picture emerged. Love was the safety, to be uncertain. It was the shared, ridiculous laughter over a burned dinner, a sound that felt blasphemous against the backdrop of familial disappointment. It was the patience we practiced, not because we were saints, but because we were both wounded and trying to heal. It was choosing to see their family's traditions not as a threat to my own, but as a new language I could learn. This love wasn't about fulfilling a destiny or a duty. It was about building a universe, brick by humble brick, with its own laws of gravity, where loyalty weighed more than passion and respect looked like giving each other the space to grieve the families we'd, in a way, lost. Their silence had revoked the old, handed-down contract. I had to write a new one, clause by clause, in the language of my own lived experience. This new internal clarity demanded new ways of communicating. First, and most importantly, with my partner. We could no longer afford the lazy shorthand of assumed understanding. The external pressure had shown us our weak points. So we began to talk, really talk, in a way we never had before. We instituted a kind of radical honesty, not as a weapon, but as a tool for survival. When your mom didn't call on my birthday, it made me feel invisible, they might say. And instead of getting defensive, I had to learn to listen and say, I understand, it makes me feel like I failed you. We named the ghosts, the shame, the fear, the doubt, and in naming them, they lost some of their power. We built a vocabulary for our unique struggle, words that meant nothing to anyone else but held our shared history. Then the most daunting task, learning to communicate with my parents. I could not break their silence by shouting into it. I had to speak across it in a new tongue. The language of defiance was useless. It only confirmed their fears. The language of pleading was draining. It begged for a permission they would never grant. I had to find a third language, the language of calm, unassailable declaration. It wasn't about debate or justification. I was not presenting a case for the defense. I was reading a statement from the throne of my own life. I remember the first time I tried it. My mother on the phone was navigating a canyon of small talk. Instead of playing along, I took a breath that felt like it reached my toes. "Mama," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted, but steady. "I know this is hard for you. I know you're worried, and you have questions you feel you can't ask. I miss you, but I need you to know that I am happy. This is my life. I am choosing it." The silence on the other end was different this time. Not heavy with disapproval, but stunned perhaps by the sheer fact of my voice filling a space they had left empty. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was the first pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples were small, a tentative question about my partner's job weeks later, a reluctant invitation for a casual coffee that wasn't a holiday. I was no longer a petitioner at their throne. I was an ambassador from a neighboring country, establishing diplomatic relations. We think courage is standing up to a shout. But that's easy. The shout gives you something to push against. Real courage is speaking your truth into a void and trust. Ting that the echo, even if it's just your own, is enough. That is the final seismic lesson. Their silence taught me that love isn't about permission. Permission is a child's game. It keeps you forever looking into someone else's eyes for a reflection of your own worth. It's about courage. The courage to hear your own heart above the quiet. The courage to define a world for yourself, even if its borders aren't recognized by the old maps. The courage to speak in a voice that is yours alone, first in a whisper to the person you love, then finally into the vast and waiting quiet left by the people who taught you how to speak in the first place. Their silence was the void, and my voice, shaky but true, was the life I chose to build inside it. That final, steady breath into the phone, the one that carried my simple, unarguable truth, didn't end the silence. It couldn't. What it did was change the nature of the quiet. It was no longer a wall they had built around me. It had become a space between us, and I had just placed something of my own in that space. A marker, a flag. It was small, but it was mine. And in the weeks and months that followed, I realized the journey through that silence wasn't about reaching the other side to a place of ringing approval and perfect understanding. That place likely doesn't exist. It was about learning to navigate the quiet without getting lost in it. About becoming so familiar with the sound of my own footsteps that I could walk through the dark without panic. I began to see the small, almost imperceptible shifts. A text from my mother that included, "Hope you and partner's name are staying warm in this weather." Not an endorsement, but an acknowledgement, a syllable carved from the monolith of her quiet. My father, on a visit, pointedly offering a bowl of nuts to my partner first, a tiny, monumental gesture. They were learning the new language too, one halting phrase at a time. The silence wasn't gone, but it was no longer empty. It was now punctuated by these fragile, brave attempts at contact, like the first few notes of a song being learned by ear. And in my own life, the quiet had done its transformative work. The relationship that had been forged in the heat of secret rebellion and solidified in the cold of solidarity had mellowed into something stronger and quieter, a deep, abiding certainty. We no longer needed to prove our love to anyone, not even to ourselves. It just was. The energy we had spent on decoding glances and steeling ourselves for battle was now free to be spent on building a garden, planning a trip, on the gentle, unremarkable joy of a shared Sunday morning. The love we had defined on our own terms had become the very air we breathed, unseen, essential, and no longer up for debate. This is the strange alchemy of that parental silence. When they withhold their words, their narrative, their script, they unintentionally hand you the pen. The page is terrifyingly blank, but if you can steady your hand, you get to write a story they could never have imagined for you. It might be a story with different values, a different setting, a different kind of happy ending. It is a story they may never fully read or celebrate, but it is yours. And there is a power in that authorship that eventually eclipses the pain of their initial critique. I think of all the others out there living in their own versions of this quiet. The person whose family went silent when they changed careers, moved across the world, left a faith, or simply became someone who no longer fit the designated mold. Our stories are written in different languages, but the grammar of the silence is the same, a period where their love feels conditional, a question mark over your own worth, a long ellipsis waiting for you to fill in the next words. So, if your parents have ever spoken volumes by saying nothing, if you've sat at a table where the clink of cutlery is like a thunderclap, if you've felt your heart hammering against a wall of their calm disapproval, if you've ever had to learn the exhausting art of translating quiet into meaning, please know this: you are not alone. You are part of a quiet, scattered tribe learning to hum its own anthem. And that silence you're sitting in, that vast, heavy, intimidating quiet, it might just be the beginning of your own voice. Not the voice that reacts or pleads or rebels, but the one that simply speaks its truth. The one that says, I am here, this is me, and I am building a life that is true. The first step is to listen for that voice beneath the fear. It's there, even if it's just a whisper. Write it down, say it out loud to your bathroom mirror, share it with one trusted friend, then take that terrifying and liberating step of speaking it calmly and clearly into the space their silence has created. You may not get the response you hope for, but you will get something infinitely more valuable, the resonant certainty of your own truth echoing back at you. Have you ever experienced the silence? What did it sound like in your house? Was it over a relationship, a dream, an identity? What did you hear in that quiet, and what did it eventually teach you to say? Your story is a lantern for someone else still fumbling in the dark. Tell me your story below. And if you're reading this and thinking of someone, a friend, a sibling, a partner, who is navigating their own path through a family's quiet judgment, tag someone who gets it. Let them know they're not shouting into a void, that their voice matters, that the silence is not the end of the story, it's the blank page before the first brave word.